You'll remember last week we discussed a racially segregated event at the University of Ottawa, but they were also rocked by two scandals of a sexual nature. One of a sexually graphic online chat that was had about a student union leader, and the other is an alleged sexual assault involving University of Ottawa hockey players during an away game in Thunder Bay on January 31st and February 1st. Police are still investigating the latter, but in the meantime, President Alan Rock and Chancellor Michaëlle Jean gave a press conference announcing a task force to tackle sexual violence. A lot of people say we need to end the rape culture on campuses, including U of O. Now, journalist Cathy Young has been investigating sex crimes on campus, including a feature in the January cover story for Reason magazine. She's a writer for Reason, and she joins us now from New York. Cathy, thanks so much for stopping by. And I first want to ask you, we hear this...
thank you for having me.
We hear this term rape culture a lot now in sort of activist circles and also in the mass media. And I think for a lot of regular folks, it's hard to even understand what exactly they're denoting by that term.
Yeah, it's sort of migrated in the last couple of years, I think, from the feminist academy and blogosphere into the mainstream. And what it actually means is the notion that in our culture, rape and sexual violence are so normalized that they really kind of permeate the whole culture, and they're condoned and tolerated, and they're really kind of regarded as a part of really normal practice between men and women. So that's all of that is kind of packed into this term rape culture.
And Cathy, that really confuses me, only because we'll hear stories in the news about in India, for instance, they're sort of not pressing charges in a rape, or there's another country where a girl alleges there's a rape and they toss her in jail and so forth. And here, I mean, if there's a serious allegation about a rape, I mean, the police go after it, which is why it's so hard to understand where they're going with this lingo.
Yeah, well, certainly there are cultures around the world where, for many complicated reasons, sexual violence against women really is condoned in many circumstances, especially within marriage. It's not even regarded as a crime. I would say, to refer to modern North American or European culture as a rape culture is really kind of absurd. Rape is regarded as a really horrific crime. It's one of the most stigmatized offenses, really. And are there certain subcultures in which, certain kinds of sexual violence may be condoned? Some fraternity environments, I think that that can be a real problem. Some of the athletic culture. But, there are subcultures in which many different kinds of violence are condoned. It's not just sexual violence. So I think, to just use this blanket term to describe our culture as a rape culture, I think really is just bizarre and offensive.
Now, Cathy, I know you've looked into a lot of sexual assault crimes and allegations on campuses in the U.S.
Right.
And I know you don't know a lot. Nobody else knows a lot about what happened at the U of O case. We do know this task force has been struck where they want to implement policies and try to sort of change the culture there. It's sort of very confusing to me what they plan to do. Based on what you know from the U.S. stories, I mean, what would you recommend we be aware of when the University of Ottawa moves ahead with this?
Right. Well, again, it's this very blanket term that is used to stigmatize really all kinds of attitudes that are seen as politically incorrect. There's this whole notion that, for men to even comment on women's sexual attractiveness is part of the rape culture, because somehow, if a man feels he has the right to comment on a woman's looks, that somehow means that, he feels that he's also entitled to make use of her body, which is really bizarre. I mean, women comment on men's looks also, by the way. That's really not a gender-specific thing. So there are just these really far-reaching assertions that I think really need to be watched out for, assertions that I think generally tend to be very stigmatizing to men, very stigmatizing to male sexuality. So these are the things really to watch out for. Also, I think the notion, which is very much inherent in this whole concept of the rape culture, that, to even speak about false accusations is itself somehow condoning the rape culture. That's very much a part of this mindset. Also, the idea that, there are no gray areas, that, unless there's this absolutely clear-cut, clearly stated explicit consent, which, really doesn't happen in a lot of sexual interactions. That anything that's in the least kind of murky or confused or ambiguous, that that has to be equated with sexual assault. If a woman who was intoxicated feels the next day that she didn't really consent to this, and I'm not even talking about cases in which the woman was unconscious. There was a bizarre case recently at Ohio University in the United States, in which there was I'm not going to get explicit, but there was a public sex act that was caught on camera by several people between two very, very drunk students. And the next day, the woman didn't apparently have any memory of this. Then she sees this video clip on YouTube, and she gets upset. She goes to the police and says that she was raped. And not only were there eyewitnesses, but this was actually on tape. And on tape, it was on photographs. It was really very, very obvious that she was entirely conscious. She was smiling. She was kind of actually encouraging the guy to go forward. Was she drunk? Yes, but so was the guy. And there were eyewitnesses who said, yeah, it definitely looked consensual, but, obviously they were both drunk. And this became a huge scandal on campus in which people said, oh my God, this is horrible. All these people were standing there watching this woman being raped. This is, a prime example of the rape culture. And why are you blaming her because she was drunk? Well, no one is blaming an actual rape victim because she was drunk. What people are saying is, if you do have consensual sex when your judgment is impaired by alcohol, you cannot then the next day decide that, oh, yeah, I didn't really want this, or I wouldn't have wanted this if I had been in my right mind, so therefore this is sexual violence. And the police, by the way, did dismiss the case, but on campus, it is still regarded, there are still these student-faculty forums in which this case has been discussed as an example of how there is this pervasive rape culture and glamorization of sexual violence on campus. And this is the kind of thing that I think really, really needs to be re-examined. Because, ironically, I think we're taking a very patronizing view of young women here. If you're basically telling young women that whatever you do when you're intoxicated, again, not talking about cases where someone is unconscious and taken advantage of, but, what
Kathy,
you do
unfortunately, we're out
of
time. I got to interrupt you, but I really want to thank you so much for your analysis. And I know this story is probably only going to, these situations are only going to increase rather than decrease. So hopefully we'll have you back.
Yeah. And I mean, the one thing to watch out for, again, I want to repeat, is this notion that there are no false accusations. If there's an accusation, that somehow, that equals truth.
Great closing point.